The fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting shadows across the rough timber walls of the Colorado cabin. October wind rattled the windows, carrying the smell of snow from peaks already white against the darkening sky. Caleb Stone sat in his leather chair, weathered hands resting on the armrests, watching his grandson William pack a canvas rucksack with the careful movements of a young man trying not to think about what comes next. The boy was 19, old enough to fight, old enough to die. Caleb was 82, old enough to remember when he believed the same thing about himself. William folded a wool shirt and placed it in the bag. His hands trembled slightly, not from cold, from the weight of the train ticket in his breast pocket. 3rd Infantry Division, sailing for France in 6 days. The Great War had been grinding through Europe for 4 years, chewing up a generation of young men, and now it wanted William too. "Grandpa," the boy said, not looking up from his packing. "Did you ever, when you went to war, were you scared?" Caleb studied his grandson's face. Strong jaw, clear eyes, Martha Stone's cheekbones. The old man reached beside his chair and lifted a leather-bound journal. It's covered dark with age and oil from countless hands. He set it on the table between them with a soft thud. "Grandson, son," Caleb said, his voice still mountain strong despite the years. "War will ask you to kill, but the real question is this. What are you willing to die for?" William looked at the journal, then at his grandfather. "That's not an answer. It's the only answer that matters." Caleb opened the journal to the first page. Ink faded but legible. A woman's handwriting. September 15th, 1885. "Before you go to that battlefield, I need to tell you about the day I learned that sometimes the most important fights don't happen where you expect them." The wind gusted harder. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called. "It started," Caleb said, "the day 4 nuns ran into my valley carrying the truth in a leather satchel. And it ended with me understanding that hiding from the world isn't peace. It's just cowardice in a holy disguise." William sat down across from his grandfather, the packing forgotten. Caleb closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, he was no longer 82. He was 49, and the silence was everything. The mountains remembered silence better than most places. They held it in the spaces between trees, in the stillness of high-altitude air, in the way snow fell without sound onto granite, already ancient when the first humans walked these peaks. Caleb Stone had lived in that silence for 18 years. Not the peaceful quiet of contentment, but the hollow absence of human voice. The kind of silence that grew like ice in the cracks of a man's soul, until there was nothing left but the cold. September morning, 1885. Altitude 9,200 feet. The sun came over the eastern ridge and turned the valley gold, touching the tops of the ponderosa pines before reaching down to where Caleb's cabin sat in a clearing he had carved from wilderness with his own hands. 20 feet by 20 feet of hand-hewn cedar logs, chinked with mud and moss, a stone fireplace that drew clean, windows shuttered against winter, a door that locked from the inside, a tomb he had built for himself while still breathing. Caleb woke at 4:30, same as every morning. The routine was armor against thinking, against remembering. He dressed in buckskin worn soft as cloth, pulled on boots he had made himself from elk hide, checked his weapons. The Sharp's .50 caliber rifle hung above the mantel, its octagonal barrel catching the first light. The Colt Peacemaker rested in its holster on the peg by the door. The Bowie knife rode on his belt, its blade 12 inches of folded steel that could skin an elk or kill a man with equal efficiency. He had not spoken to another human being in 18 years. Outside, the air tasted of pine resin and coming snow. His 2 horses, a bay mare and a dun gelding, nickered softly from the corral. They were the only creatures that heard his voice anymore. Even then, he used it sparingly. A click of the tongue, a low whistle. Words felt foreign in his mouth like stones he had swallowed and never quite learned to digest. The trap line ran 6 miles in a rough circuit through the high country. Marten and beaver, mostly some fox when winter came hard. He checked each set with methodical care, reset the springs, noted the tracks. Elk had passed through during the night. A mountain lion had marked territory on a lightning-struck pine. The forest spoke to him in ways human language never had. By noon, he was back at the cabin, skinning 3 marten and 1 beaver. His hands moved with practiced precision. Pelt stretched on the frame, meat set aside for smoking. Nothing wasted. This was survival distilled to its essence. Kill, preserve, endure. He worked in silence, but the silence was never truly empty. Voices echoed there, always the same voices. Ellen, his wife, laughing at something he could no longer remember. The sound of her skirts swishing across the Kansas prairie grass. The way she hummed while cooking. The fever had taken her in 3 days. Diphtheria. A mercy the doctor had said that she went before their son. Thomas, 7 years old, eyes like his mother's, voice like a bird's call. The boy had lasted 5 days. Caleb had been out hunting. Came back to a cold cabin and two bodies already stiff. Had to break the ground with a pickaxe because it was frozen. Buried them on a hill where the sun rose first. And then 1 month later, the telegram. Your mother, Martha Stone, died September 10th, 1869. Come home to Colorado. He had gone. Found more graves, more questions with no answers. The sheriff called it an accident, a spooked horse, a tragic fall. But Caleb had found the bullet hole in the cabin door frame, had seen the bloodstains the rain had not quite washed away, had noted the fresh earth behind the old mission church where someone had been digging. His mother had been murdered, and he had done nothing. Instead, he had walked into these mountains and built this cabin and lived like a dead man for 18 years, because the alternative was confronting a world that took everything and gave back only pain. The sun crossed the sky. Caleb worked through the afternoon, his hands busy, his mind carefully blank. This was the discipline of survival. Do not think, do not feel, do not remember, just endure. By evening, he stood at the cabin window looking out over the valley. The light turned everything copper and bronze. A hawk rode thermals above the ridge. Somewhere below, a creek ran cold and fast over stones that had been smoothing themselves for 10,000 years. He should eat, should check the horses one more time, should split more wood for the coming winter. Instead, he stood at the window, one hand braced against the frame, and let himself remember his mother's voice. Caleb, she had written in her last letter, the one that arrived after she was already dead. Silence is not peace, it's just fear wearing Sunday clothes. Come back to life, son. The world needs good men who've seen darkness and chosen light anyway. He had burned that letter, but the words remained carved into his memory like initials on a tree. The sound came just as the sun touched the western peaks. Distant, sharp, unmistakable. Gunfire. Caleb froze. His hand dropped to the Colt at his hip. The shots came again, rolling across the valley like thunder, but sharper, more deliberate. Rifles, multiple shooters, 2 miles away, maybe less. Down in the valley where the old wagon trail cut through. He had not heard gunfire this close in years. Hunters sometimes passed through in elk season, but this was different. This was sustained. This was pursuit. Caleb moved to the shelf where he kept his spyglass, a brass telescope salvaged from his army days. He stepped onto the porch, raised the glass, and swept the valley. At first, nothing, just trees and shadow, and the golden light turning everything the color of old blood. Then movement. 4 figures in black running hard through the scrub oak and sage. Even at 2 miles, even in failing light, he could see the distinctive shapes. Long skirts, head coverings fluttering in the wind. Nuns. Behind them, closing fast, 8 riders spread in a loose arc. Rifles glinted. Dust rose from the horses' hooves. The riders were herding the women, driving them like cattle, cutting off escape routes. Caleb lowered the glass. His heart, which had beaten slow and steady for 18 years, suddenly hammered against his ribs. Not your problem, the survivor in him whispered. Close the door. Bar the shutters. Pretend you saw nothing. But his hand was already reaching for the Sharp's rifle. The nuns were a mile out now. Caleb could see them more clearly without the glass. The leader was tall, running with the efficiency of someone who knew how to move through rough country. She pulled the smallest one along, the girl stumbling, but never quite falling. The other 2 flanked them, one carrying something clutched to her chest, the other constantly looking back at their pursuers. The gunfire came again. Warning shots, Caleb judged. High and wide. They wanted the women alive, at least for now. The nuns changed direction, angling toward his cabin. Caleb's stomach clenched. The last time strangers had come to his door seeking help, it had been 2 Cherokee scouts running from a cavalry patrol gone rogue. He had hidden them, fed them, sent them on their way. 3 days later, the patrol came looking, found evidence, burned his mother's house with her in it. At least that was the story he had pieced together from whispers and rumors, and the smell of smoke that still haunted his dreams. The nuns were 500 yards out, close enough that he could see their faces, dust-streaked, sweat dampened, but not panicked. Even in flight, they moved with purpose. The lead woman's eyes found him on the porch. She raised one hand, not waving, but acknowledging. "We see you. We're coming to you. Help us or don't, but we're coming." A bullet cracked past closer than before. It hit the trunk of a pine 30 yards from the cabin, sending bark flying. The smallest nun cried out but didn't stop running. Caleb made his decision. He opened the door and stepped inside, leaving it unbarred behind him. They reached the porch, gasping, stumbling, falling against the railing and each other. The tall one got her breath first. She looked at Caleb with gray eyes that held no begging, only a stark assessment of whether he was worth the risk they were taking by trusting him. "Please," she said. Her voice carried an Irish lilt softened by years but still there. "They're hunting us." "Why?" Caleb's voice cracked on the single word. "Rust and disuse." The sound of it startled him. A bullet splintered the porch railing. Wood fragments struck Caleb's cheek, drawing blood. The smallest nun screamed. "Inside," Caleb said. "Now!" They poured through the door. The tall one pushed the youngest ahead of her. The one with the leather satchel followed, clutching it like a child. The fourth, wild-eyed and fierce, swept the room with a glance that cataloged every exit, every weapon, every angle of attack. Caleb slammed the door and threw the bolt. The cabin's single room suddenly felt impossibly small. Four women in black habits, their clothing torn by brush faces marked with scratches and dust. They smelled of sweat and fear and something else. Incense. The ghost of church services and candle smoke. They huddled by the cold fireplace, breathing hard. The tall one put her hand on the smallest one's shoulder, steadying her. The one with the satchel pressed it against her chest, protective. The fierce one moved to the window, peering through the gap in the shutters. Caleb stood with his back to the door, the Sharp's rifle cradled in his arms, and stared at them. "Talk," he said. "Fast." The tall one straightened. Even disheveled, even afraid, she carried herself with authority. "We're from St. Mary's Mission," she said, 40 miles south. This land, all of this valley, was granted to the Catholic Church in 1845. Federal land grant signed by the territorial governor, witnessed by civic leaders. She nodded at the woman with the satchel. "Sister Ruth has the documents, church records, witness statements, maps, all of it proving that a man named Garrett Chamberlain stole this land through fraud 15 years ago." Caleb's jaw tightened. He knew the name. Everyone in Colorado knew the name. Garrett Chamberlain owned half the territory: mines, railroads, ranches. A man who turned law into a weapon and wielded it with surgical precision. "Documents don't matter if you're dead," Caleb said. "They matter more than our lives," the tall nun replied, "because they prove the truth, and truth is the only thing that survives us." The woman with the satchel, Sister Ruth, stepped forward. She was small, bespectacled, with freckles across a sharp nose. Her hands trembled as she opened the leather bag and pulled out a sheaf of papers protected by oilcloth. "Land grant," she said, showing the first document. 1845. President James Polk's signature. Federal seal. She showed the second. Deed transfer, 1858. From territorial holdings to Catholic diocese. A third document. Witness testimony. September 10th, 1869. The date hit Caleb like a fist. September 10th, 1869. The day his mother died. His hand shot out, snatching the paper. The handwriting was neat, feminine, familiar. "I, Martha Stone, do hereby swear that on August 12th, 1845, I personally witnessed Governor Charles Bent sign the land grant deed conveying 10,000 acres in the Colorado Territory to the Catholic Diocese of Santa Fe for the establishment of St. Mary's Mission." The paper shook in Caleb's hands. His mother's signature sat at the bottom, ink faded but unmistakable. The tall nun watched him. "She was your mother, wasn't she, Caleb Stone?" He looked up. "How do you know my name?" "She spoke of you before she died, said you were an Army scout, said you were strong, said you were good, said if we could find you, you'd help." Caleb's throat closed. He stared at the signature, at the words written in his mother's hand 16 years ago, and felt 18 years of carefully maintained numbness begin to crack. "She was wrong," he said roughly. I don't help anyone, not anymore. A voice called from outside, loud, familiar in a way that made Caleb's blood run cold. Caleb Stone, I know you're in there. The four nuns froze. Caleb's hands tightened on the rifle. It's Samuel Hart, the voice continued. Your old friend. Let's talk like civilized men. The fierce nun hissed. You know him. Caleb's eyes never left the door. Used to. He's leading them, she said. He's the one who's been hunting us for 3 days. Caleb moved to the door, stood with his shoulder against the wood. Sam, that really you in the flesh. Been a long time, brother. 16 years, not since Beecher Island. Not since Samuel Hart pulled Caleb out of a trench with half his guts hanging out and held him together while they waited for the surgeon. What do you want? Caleb called. 4 Catholic sisters. Heard they're carrying stolen documents. Thought you might have seen them. Documents aren't stolen. A long pause. Then Samuel's voice again, lower, almost sad. Then this is going to get messy, Caleb. Caleb unhooked the chain, cracked the door. Samuel stood 10 feet from the porch, hands visible at his sides. He had aged, gone thick around the middle. His mustache was gray, his face lined. But those eyes, blue and sharp, were the same ones that had watched Caleb's back through a dozen firefights. You're working for Chamberlain, Caleb said. Not a question, Samuel shrugged. Man's gotta eat. Used to be we fought for something bigger than paychecks. Used to be a lot of things. Samuel studied him. You look like hell, living up here alone all these years. What's that done to you? Kept me alive. That ain't the same as living. Samuel glanced at the cabin. Those women in there with you. Caleb didn't answer. Samuel sighed. I saved your life at Beecher Island. You remember that 1868 Colorado? You took a gut shot and I dragged you to cover under fire. Held your intestines in with my bare hands while we waited for the surgeon. The memory rose unbidden. The smell of blood and gunpowder. The feeling of his own organs sliding between his fingers. Samuel's voice in his ear, steady and calm. Stay with me, brother. You don't get to die today. I remember, Caleb said. Then you know you owe me. Samuel's voice hardened. Hand them over. You walk away. No one dies. Simple. Behind Caleb in the cabin's shadows, he heard the nuns breathing, heard the smallest one trying not to cry, heard Sister Ruth clutching that satchel like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to earth. He looked at the document still in his hand, his mother's signature. I made my choice, Caleb said. Samuel's face changed. Disappointment flickered there, then resignation. You're making a mistake. Probably, but it's mine to make. Samuel turned to walk 10 paces, then looked back. I'll give you 1 hour, then we burn you out. He disappeared into the trees. Caleb bolted the door and turned to face the 4 women. They stared at him with a mixture of hope and terror. The tall nun stepped forward. You didn't have to do that. Caleb read his mother's testimony again. Thought about 18 years of hiding, 18 years of silence, 18 years pretending the world couldn't touch him if he just stayed small enough, quiet enough, dead enough. How many men out there, he asked. The fierce nun answered, 8, maybe more by now. What's in that land worth killing nuns for? Sister Ruth spoke up, her voice trembling but clear. Silver. The assayer's report shows a major deposit, worth millions. Caleb walked to the window, looked out at the darkening valley. Shadows moved in the trees. They were positioning, surrounding. Samuel was good at this. He always had been. The tall nun came to stand beside him. I need to tell you something, she said quietly. My name isn't just Sister Margaret. It's Margaret Grayson. Father Thomas Grayson was my father. Garrett Chamberlain had him killed 14 years ago. I watched it happen. Her voice didn't break, but her hands did. They shook as she clasped them together. I was 17. He made it look like an accident. A spooked horse, they said. But I was hiding in the bushes. I saw the 3 men. I heard them speak Chamberlain's name. I found my father's body, and I found his diary, and I've spent 14 years in the convent waiting for the moment when I could make his death mean something. She looked at Caleb with those gray eyes. Your mother was his closest friend. She helped baptize me when I was an infant. She knew the truth and she tried to testify, and they killed her for it. Sister Margaret's voice dropped to a whisper. We're not strangers, Mr. Stone. Our family's blood is in this same soil. Caleb felt something shift inside him. A tectonic movement. The ground he had stood on for 18 years suddenly uncertain. He looked at the four of them. Sister Margaret tall and fierce and carrying her father's death like a banner. Sister Ruth small and scholarly and clutching truth like a weapon. The fierce one, who he now saw, wore the same expression his mother had worn when she set her jaw against injustice. And the youngest, maybe 19, terrified but not running. "What are your names?" he asked. "I'm Margaret," the tall one said. "Sister Catherine." The fierce one nodded. "Sister Grace." The youngest managed a small smile. "And you know Ruth?" "How much ammunition do you have, Mr. Stone?" Sister Catherine asked. Her voice was frontier, practical. Caleb walked to the cabinet, opened it. 50 rounds for the sharps, 200 for the Winchester, 100 for the revolvers, plus shotgun shells. "You know tactics?" Sister Margaret asked. "Army Scout, 5 years. Then you know we can't win a straight fight." "No," Caleb agreed, "but we can make them bleed for it." He turned to Sister Ruth. "You said Father Grayson kept a diary. What else did he hide?" She bit her lip. "The diary mentions a second document, proof even more damning than what we have. But we never found it." "Where would he hide something that important?" Sister Margaret answered. "Mother Superior Adelaide. She was his confidant. She lives at the old mission ruins 3 miles northeast." "Then that's where we go." Caleb began pulling down weapons checking loads. "Soon as it's full dark, you and I make the run. The others hold the cabin." Sister Catherine's eyes widened. "You're going with her?" Caleb looked at his mother's signature one more time, at the words she had written, the truth she had tried to protect. "I spent 18 years running from the world," he said. "Time I ran towards something worth a damn." The sun set, the valley filled with shadows. Outside torches began to glow in the darkness. 8 points of light surrounding the cabin in a loose circle. Caleb positioned the women. Sister Catherine at the east window with the Winchester. She handled it like she knew which end the bullets came out of. Sister Ruth and Sister Grace in the root cellar with the shotgun watching the back approach. Sister Margaret with him at the west window, ready to run when the moment came. They waited. The first shot came at 8 o'clock. It shattered the west window, sending glass across the floor in a glittering spray. Sister Grace flinched, but didn't scream. The second shot followed. Warning shots. Testing. Caleb raised the sharps, found a target. A man crouched behind a boulder 150 yards out. Long shot, but the sharps could do it. He breathed out, let his body settle, squeezed. The rifle roared. Smoke filled the cabin. The massive 50 caliber round hit the boulder and turned it into shrapnel. The man behind it dove away, cursing loud enough to hear. Message sent. Return fire came in a ragged volley, a dozen shots wild and angry. Bullets punched through the log walls, sent splinters flying. One grazed the doorframe. Another buried itself in the stone fireplace. Sister Catherine returned fire. 2 shots controlled and steady. Caleb heard a scream from outside. She'd hit someone. The attackers pulled back, regrouping. In the sudden quiet, Sister Margaret whispered, "They're going to burn us out, aren't they?" "Eventually," Caleb said. He was already planning. The root cellar had a tunnel, an escape route he'd dug years ago in case of exactly this. It emerged 50 yards north, hidden in thick brush. A bell rang from the cellar. Once. Sister Grace's signal. Someone at the back door. Caleb grabbed his Colt, moved fast. The back door was heavy oak, barred from inside. Someone was kicking it. Heavy boots, determined. He waited. Let the man kick twice more. Then the door splintered. The bar cracked and a figure pushed through. Caleb fired once, not to kill, to stop. The shotgun blast from the cellar came a second later. Sister Grace's hands must have been shaking, but her aim was true. The man went down, screaming, wounded in the leg. Caleb dragged him away from the door, slammed it shut, wedged a bench against it. In the cellar, Sister Grace stood with the shotgun still raised, her face white, her whole body trembling. Sister Ruth put an arm around her. "You did what you had to," Ruth said quietly. Caleb returned to the main room. Sister Catherine was checking her ammunition. Sister Margaret was watching the darkness outside. "How long can we hold?" Margaret asked. "Depends on their patience," Caleb said, "and our luck." As if in answer, something crashed near the barn. glass breaking, then the smell, kerosene. "They're setting fires around us," Sister Catherine said flatly, "creating a ring, force us to burn or run." Caleb looked at the sky through the broken window. Full dark now, moon not yet risen, perfect conditions for what he had in mind. He turned to Sister Margaret. "Get ready to move. We leave in 30 minutes." She nodded. Caleb went to the cabinet and pulled out his pack. He filled it with ammunition water, dried meat, wrapped the documents in oilcloth, checked his weapons one more time. Sister Catherine came to him. "If you don't come back, take the tunnel at dawn, run north. Don't stop until you reach Silverdale. Find Judge Wallace. Give him the documents. And if they follow us," Caleb handed her a second Colt, "then make them regret it." She took the gun. Their eyes met. Some unspoken understanding passed between them. She was older than the others, weathered by frontier life. She knew what it cost to survive, what it cost to fight. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet." The minutes crawled. Outside, the torches moved. The smell of kerosene grew stronger. They were soaking the brush around the barn, the outbuildings, creating a perimeter of combustible material that could be lit when needed. The cabin itself remained untouched. For now. Samuel wanted them alive. At 9 o'clock, Caleb and Sister Margaret dropped into the root cellar. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough to crawl through. Dirt and roots and darkness. Sister Grace and Sister Ruth watched them go, their faces pale in the lamplight. "Hold until dawn," Caleb said. "Then run." "We'll be here when you get back," Sister Catherine called from above. The tunnel swallowed them. Caleb went first, pulling himself forward on his elbows, the pack dragging behind him. Sister Margaret followed her, breathing steady despite the enclosed space. They emerged into brush 50 yards from the cabin. Caleb froze, listening. Voices to the south, the jingle of a horse's bit, a man coughing. They waited until a cloud covered the stars. Then they moved. The forest took them. Caleb knew every tree, every rock, every game trail. He led Sister Margaret northeast toward the old mission, toward Mother Superior, Adelaide, toward whatever truth Father Grayson had hidden before he died. Behind them, the cabin windows glowed with lamplight. Sister Catherine's silhouette moved past one. She was still there, still fighting. The ring of kerosene-soaked brush remained unlit. Samuel was waiting, giving Caleb time to surrender. A branch cracked somewhere close. Caleb and Margaret dropped flat. A rider passed 20 feet away, heading toward the cabin. He was singing quietly to himself, unaware. They waited until he was gone. Then they moved again. The night was full of danger. Every shadow could hide a man with a gun. Every sound could be pursuit. But Caleb had lived in these mountains for 18 years. He knew how to be a ghost when he needed to be. They climbed through pine and aspen, crossed a creek, running cold and fast, pushed through thick brush that tore at their clothes. Sister Margaret kept pace, her breath coming hard but steady. She had been raised on the frontier, Caleb realized, before the convent, before her father's death. She knew how to move through wild country. 2 miles out, they stopped to rest. Caleb checked their back trail. No pursuit yet. Samuel would assume they were still in the cabin. Sister Margaret drank from her canteen. "Why did you really let us in?" she asked quietly. Caleb thought about the question, about the moment on the porch when he could have closed the door, should have closed the door. "Sister Grace," he said finally, "the way she looked when that bullet hit the railing, same way my son looked when the fever took him." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I had 18 years to make peace with it." He stood, shouldered his pack. "Haven't managed yet, but I keep trying." They moved again. The mission ruins appeared just before midnight, stone walls rising from overgrown grass. The chapel still stood, its roof partially collapsed, but its walls intact. Stained glass windows, broken and beautiful, caught the starlight and turned it into colors that shouldn't exist in darkness. A single candle burned inside. Mother Superior Adelaide was waiting. The chapel smelled of stone and time and something else. Smoke from centuries of candles. Incense burned long ago. The accumulated weight of prayers spoken into darkness by people who believed someone was listening. Mother Superior Adelaide knelt before the altar, her back to the door. She did not turn when Caleb and Sister Margaret entered, did not startle at the sound of their footsteps on the broken tiles, simply continued her prayer. her voice a whisper that echoed off the walls like water finding its way through cracks in rock. When she finished, she crossed herself, rose slowly, turned. Her left eye was milky white blind. Her right eye was dark and sharp as obsidian. She looked at them with that single functioning eye and somehow saw more than most people did with two. "I've been expecting you, child," she said to Sister Margaret, Mother Adelaide. Margaret's voice carried relief and something deeper. "Coming home." The old nun shifted her gaze to Caleb. "And you brought Martha Stone's son." "Good." Caleb stiffened. "You knew my mother." "I watched her die." Adelaide's voice held no emotion, just fact delivered the way you might report the weather. "Three men came. September 10th, 1869. I was in the bell tower cleaning the brass. I saw everything." She moved closer, small steps, the movements of someone whose body had outlasted her joints. She wouldn't give them Father Grayson's second document. They asked nice at first, then not so nice. Then they shot her. Once in the chest, she went down, but she wasn't dead yet. I climbed down from the tower, ran to her, held her while the blood came out. Adelaide's good eye never left Caleb's face. Her last words, "You want to know what they were?" Caleb's throat closed. He managed a nod. "Tell my son I'm proud he served his country. Tell him to come home." Adelaide tilted her head. "But you didn't come home, did you? You ran into those mountains and stayed there." "I couldn't," Caleb's voice failed. "Couldn't what?" "Couldn't bear to live in a world that took everything. Couldn't face the people who killed her. Couldn't admit that running away felt safer than fighting back." Each word landed like a stone. Not cruel, just true. "I was a coward," Caleb said quietly. "You were hurt." Adelaide's voice softened a fraction. "But hurt and coward aren't the same thing. One is what the world does to you. The other is what you choose to become after." She turned to Sister Margaret. "You came for the document." "Yes, Mother." Adelaide walked to the altar. Her fingers found the edge of the stone top. She pressed, and a section shifted. The grinding of stone on stone filled the chapel. A hidden compartment opened beneath. From it, Adelaide lifted a tin box, waterproofed, sealed with wax. "Father Thomas knew they would kill him," she said. "So 2 weeks before it happened, he gave me this, made me swear to keep it until the land itself cried out for justice. I've been waiting 16 years. She handed the box to Caleb. "Open it." His hands shook as he broke the seal. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were 4 documents. The first was the original federal land grant, 1845. President James Polk's signature in iron gall ink, still dark despite the decades. The presidential seal embossed into the paper, impossible to forge. The second was a surveyor's map, hand-drawn but meticulous, showing exact boundaries, landmarks, water sources. The kind of detail that settled disputes in court. The third was an assayer's report, dated 1870, silver deposit, estimated value $2 million at current prices, more than enough reason to kill. But the fourth document made Caleb's hands go still. A letter, written on official territorial stationery, addressed to Garrett Chamberlain. "Your payment of $5,000 received with gratitude. The land transfer will be approved despite irregularities in the chain of title. Governor's office will expedite all necessary paperwork. No further questions will be raised regarding the prior claim. Signed Governor Edmund Hutchins. Dated May 3rd, 1870. "Jesus," Caleb whispered. Sister Margaret leaned over his shoulder reading, her breath caught. "The governor was bribed. This isn't just local corruption. This is federal." Adelaide nodded. "That letter destroys Chamberlain. But more than that, it proves the territorial government was complicit. Federal prosecutors would salivate over this." Caleb looked at the old nun. "You've been sitting on this for 16 years. Why not come forward before Bo? Who would believe a blind old woman living in ruins?" Adelaide's smile was bitter. "I needed proof. I needed witnesses. I needed someone the law would listen to." She pointed at the documents. "Now I have all 3. Distant gunfire cracked through the night. Multiple rifles. Sustained from the direction of the cabin." Caleb was moving before the echoes faded. He ran to the chapel door, looked northeast. 2 miles away, barely visible orange light flickered in multiple spots. Not the steady glow of lamplight. Fire. but not the cabin itself, the ring around it. "They're lighting the perimeter," he said. His voice came out flat, controlled. "Trying to smoke them out or force a surrender." Sister Margaret grabbed his arm. "Sister Catherine, Ruth, Grace, they're still there. They know to use the tunnel if it gets too hot." But even as Caleb said it, doubt gnawed at him. What if Samuel had found the tunnel? What if they were trapped? Adelaide's voice cut through his spiral. "The dead are dead, boy. You can't change that. But those three are alive right now. Keep them that way." Caleb looked at the documents in his hands, at the proof that could destroy Chamberlain, at the truth his mother had died protecting. "We have to get back," Sister Margaret said. "No." Caleb's mind was working now, tactical and cold. The part of him that had survived 5 years of frontier warfare. "We go back, we're surrounded, trapped. We need to think like soldiers, not rescuers." "Then what do we do?" Caleb studied the map, the land grant, the governor's letter. His mind turned over possibilities. Discarded most. Held on to one. "We take this to the law," he said. "Real law, federal law." "The nearest federal judge is in Denver," Adelaide said. 300 miles. "I know a judge closer than that." Caleb looked at Sister Margaret. "Judge Henry Wallace. He investigated my mother's death back in '69. He's circuit judge now. Rides between Silverdale and Denver." "Silverdale is 15 miles from here," Margaret said. "If we can reach him, if he's there." "He'll be there." Adelaide's good eye gleamed. "He always stops in Silverdale on Fridays. Today's Friday." Hope flickered in Margaret's face, then died. "Chamberlain owns the sheriff in Silverdale. We'd be walking into his territory." "Not if we get to the telegraph first." Caleb was seeing it now, the whole plan unfolding like a map. "We send the evidence to Denver, to the federal marshal's office. They'll come with arrest warrants." Sister Margaret stared at him. "Can you send documents by telegraph?" "No, but you can send photographs." Caleb pointed at Sister Ruth's carefully documented evidence. "She brought a camera. I saw it in her satchel. New technology, portable. If we can photograph these documents, transmit the images." "It would take hours," Margaret said, "and we'd need someone who knows the technology." "Mrs. Henshaw runs the telegraph office in Silverdale." Adelaide's voice was certain. "She's Catholic. Lost her husband to one of Chamberlain's mine collapses. She'd help." The gunfire from the cabin intensified, a prolonged exchange, then silence. Caleb made his decision. "We run for Silverdale. We send the evidence. We bring the law down on Chamberlain before he can kill anyone else." "What about the sisters at your cabin?" Margaret asked. "They're smart. They'll use the tunnel when the fire gets close enough. We'll meet them in Silverdale." He looked at Adelaide. "Can you make it 15 miles?" The old nun laughed. It was a sound like wind through dried bones. "Boy, I walked 30 miles in a blizzard when I was 70. I can manage 15 on a clear night." "Then we move now." They left the chapel. The stars were hard and bright overhead. No moon yet. The darkness was absolute between the trees, but Caleb knew these mountains by feel. He led them northeast away from his burning perimeter, away from Samuel's men toward the town and the telegraph in the slim chance of survival. The terrain was brutal, steep climbs followed by steeper descents, creek crossings where the water ran fast enough to sweep a person away, deadfall and loose rock, and 1,000 ways to break an ankle in the dark. Adelaide kept pace. Caleb kept glancing back, expecting her to falter. But the old nun moved with the certainty of someone who had walked mountain trails before there were trails. She used a walking stick cut from a pine branch, planted it with each step, and simply refused to slow down. Sister Margaret moved beside him, silent and focused. Once she stumbled on a root. Caleb caught her elbow, steadied her. She nodded thanks and kept moving. They had covered maybe 3 miles when voices drifted through the trees ahead. Men. 2 of them. Close. Caleb raised a fist. "Stop." They froze. Margaret and Adelaide melted into the shadows like they'd been doing it their whole lives. Caleb crouched behind a fallen log, hand on his Colt. The voices grew clearer. "Going soft. Should have burned them out hours ago. Chamberlain wants them alive. Make an example. Screw that. I'm tired and I'm cold and I want to go home. Let's just kill them and collect." The voices were moving. coming closer. Caleb could see the glow of their cigarettes now. 20 yards. 15. He held his breath. The two men passed within 10 feet. So close Caleb could smell tobacco smoke and whiskey and unwashed bodies. They walked right past the fallen log, arguing about pay rates and wondering whether Chamberlain would dock them if the nuns ended up dead instead of captured. Then they were gone, fading into the forest. Caleb waited a full minute before moving. When he did, Sister Margaret was right behind him. "We need to be more careful," she whispered. "We need to be faster," Caleb replied. "They're everywhere." But something one of the men had said stuck in his mind. Chamberlain wants them alive. Why dead was easier. Dead couldn't testify. Dead couldn't produce documents. Unless Chamberlain wanted a public execution, a spectacle. Hang the nuns in the town square as a warning to anyone else who might challenge his authority. The thought made Caleb's blood run cold. They pushed harder. Adelaide's breathing grew labored, but she didn't ask to rest. Sister Margaret developed a limp, but kept walking. Caleb's shoulder, grazed by a bullet earlier, throbbed with each step. The moon finally rose, a thin crescent that gave just enough light to see the trail, but not enough to feel safe. 4 miles from Silverdale, they crossed a ridge and looked down into the valley. The town was a scattering of lights, maybe 40 buildings, church spire reaching toward the stars, and in the center, barely visible, the telegraph office. "Almost there," Margaret said. Then Adelaide stopped, her head cocked, listening. "Horses," she said quietly, "behind us." Caleb heard it a second later, the sound of hooves on rock. Multiple horses, moving fast. They had been found. "Run," Caleb said. They ran. Adelaide abandoned her walking stick and moved with a speed that should have been impossible for a woman her age. Sister Margaret pulled ahead, her long legs eating distance. Caleb brought up the rear, his rifle ready. The horses were gaining. He could hear shouts now, men calling to each other, coordinating. The trail ahead forked, left toward Silverdale, right toward a narrow canyon that Caleb knew ended in a box. No way out. He made a decision that might kill them all. "Left," he shouted. "Into town. Don't stop for anything." They burst out of the tree line at a full sprint. The town was half a mile away. Open ground, no cover. Behind them, riders exploded from the forest. 5 of them, rifles out. A bullet cracked past Caleb's ear. "Faster," he yelled. Adelaide stumbled. Margaret grabbed her, kept her upright. They ran together, 2 women in black habits, moving through moonlight like shadows fleeing dawn. Caleb turned, fired twice with his Colt. Didn't aim to hit, just aimed to slow them down. The riders pulled up, regrouped, then came on harder. 200 yards to town, a second bullet hit the ground at Caleb's feet, kicking up dust. 100 yards. He could see faces in windows now. People woken by gunfire, looking out, some retreating deeper into their homes, others stepping onto porches. 50 yards. They hit the main street at a dead run. Adelaide collapsed against a water trough, gasping. Margaret bent, double hands on knees. Caleb spun to face the riders. They had stopped at the edge of town, silhouettes against the moonlight. Not advancing, not retreating. A door opened. The sheriff stepped out of his office. Sheriff Polk. Caleb knew him by reputation. Chamberlain's man, through and through. "Well, Polk said, hooking his thumbs in his belt. "What do we have here?" The riders entered the street, slow now, confident. They had their quarry cornered. Then something unexpected happened. A door opened across the street. The saloon. A woman stepped out, massive, 6 feet tall and built like a blacksmith. Big Martha O'Reilly. She took one look at the riders, at the exhausted women, at Caleb with his rifle. "What the hell is going on?" she demanded. More doors opened. The blacksmith, the shopkeeper, the doctor. People emerging into the street, woken by the commotion, curious and afraid and angry. Sheriff Polk raised his hands. "Just some fugitives. Nothing to concern yourselves with." "Fugitives." Big Martha pointed at the nuns. "Those are Catholic sisters. What crime did they commit? Praying too loud." Nervous laughter from the growing crowd. One of the riders, a hard-faced man Caleb didn't recognize, spoke up. "They stole property from Mr. Chamberlain." "What property?" someone called from the crowd. "Documents, church records." "So Chamberlain's stealing from the church now." Big Martha's voice could have cut steel. That what we're supposed to believe, the crowd murmured, shifting. Not quite hostile yet, but getting there. Sheriff Polk saw it too. Everyone just calm down. We'll sort this out in the morning. I don't think so. A new voice, elderly but strong. Mrs. Henshaw, the telegraph operator, she stood in the doorway of her office, arms crossed. I think we'll sort it out right now. She looked at Sister Margaret. You're from St. Mary's Mission. Yes, ma'am. I know your mother came to the mission when I was sick. She nursed me back to health. Mrs. Henshaw's eyes swept the crowd. These women are good people. I don't know what they're accused of, but I know Garrett Chamberlain, and I know who I trust. She stepped aside, held the telegraph office door open. You need to send a message, she said to Margaret. Now would be a good time. For a moment, everything hung in balance. The riders could charge, the sheriff could intervene, the crowd could scatter. Then Big Martha moved. She stepped between the riders and the telegraph office. Put her hands on her hips. Anyone wanting to stop these ladies from sending their message, she said conversationally, is going to have to go through me first. The blacksmith Henry Morrison stepped up beside her. Then the shopkeeper. Then the doctor. A line formed. 10 people, then 15, then 20. Ordinary people making an extraordinary choice. Sheriff Polk looked at the riders. The riders looked at the crowd. The mathematics were simple. 5 guns against 20 angry townspeople in close quarters. The hard-faced rider spat. Chamberlain's going to hear about this. I'm sure he will, Mrs. Henshaw said calmly. Now get off my street before I telegraph the territorial marshal about armed men threatening citizens. The riders backed their horses. Slow, resentful, but they backed. Mrs. Henshaw ushered Caleb, Margaret, and Adelaide inside. Shut the door. Locked it. The telegraph office was small, cluttered with equipment. The walls covered in maps and wanted posters and notices about train schedules. You have documents that need sending, Mrs. Henshaw said. Not a question. Sister Margaret pulled out the oilcloth bundle, laid the documents on the desk under the lamp. Mrs. Henshaw studied them. Her face went very still. This is the governor's signature, she said quietly, admitting to bribery. Can you send it? Caleb asked. I can photograph it. There's new technology. Telegraph companies have been testing image transmission. It's slow, it's expensive, but it works. She looked at him. Who are you sending it to? Judge Henry Wallace, federal circuit judge. He should be in Denver. Mrs. Henshaw nodded, moved to her equipment. Her hands flew over the keys, sending the initial message. They waited. 5 minutes. 10. Then the machine chattered to life. Wallace, here, stop. Send evidence. Stop, marshal standing by. Stop. Mrs. Henshaw looked at them. This is going to take hours. You should rest. We can't rest, Sister Margaret said. Chamberlain will send more men. As if summoned by her words, hoofbeats sounded outside. Heavy. Multiple horses. Caleb moved to the window. His heart sank. 40 riders, maybe more, surrounding the telegraph office. And in the lead on a pure black stallion sat a man in an expensive coat. Well-groomed, distinguished. Garrett Chamberlain had arrived. The oil baron dismounted with the ease of someone who had never questioned his right to do exactly as he pleased. He stood in the street looking at the telegraph office at the crowd of townspeople still gathered. Mrs. Henshaw, he called. His voice was cultured, Boston accent, the kind of voice that made threats sound like invitations. I believe you have some of my property in there. Mrs. Henshaw opened the window. I have 4 people seeking asylum and exercising their legal right to communicate with federal authorities. That's all I have. The documents they carry were stolen from my private files. That's a lie, Sister Margaret's voice rang out. Chamberlain's eyes found her through the window. Something flickered in his face. Recognition. Little Margaret Grayson, he said softly. All grown up, your father would be so proud. You killed my father. I have no idea what you're talking about. But Chamberlain's smile was the smile of a man who knew exactly what she was talking about and didn't care. Accidents happen on the frontier. Horses spook. People fall. Caleb stepped into view, raised his rifle, pointed it at Chamberlain's chest. My mother didn't fall, he said. She was shot 3 times while trying to testify about what you did. The street went silent. Chamberlain looked at Caleb, really looked at him, sizing him up. And you are Caleb Stone, Martha Stone's son. Something changed in Chamberlain's expression. A calculation being made. I heard you'd gone feral in the mountains, living like an animal. And now here you are pointing a gun at a respected businessman in front of half the town. He gestured at the crowd. These good people should know. Do you have any proof of these wind accusations? Caleb's finger tightened on the trigger. Mrs. Henshaw's hand fell on his shoulder. Gentle but firm. We have proof, she called out. The documents are being transmitted to Judge Wallace right now. He'll have them within hours. Chamberlain's face went pale, just for a second. Then the mask of civility returned. I see. Well then, I suppose we'll wait for the judge's response. He remounted his horse. I have 40 men. You have, 20 shopkeepers and a telegraph operator. I could take that office in 5 minutes. Big Martha stepped forward. You could try. But then you'd all be witnesses to murder, Mrs. Henshaw said, and Judge Wallace would have those photographs, and you'd hang. Chamberlain's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being cornered. Wasn't used to people saying no. This isn't over, he said. No, Caleb agreed. It's not. Chamberlain wheeled his horse, rode to the edge of town. His men followed. But they didn't leave. They set up camp, built fires, made it clear they were staying. The siege had begun. Inside the telegraph office, Mrs. Henshaw worked through the night. The equipment clicked and hummed. Slowly, painfully, the documents were photographed and transmitted, line by line, image by image. The technology was new, experimental, but it worked. By dawn, Judge Wallace had everything. His response came at 6 in the morning. Evidence received, stop arrest warrants issued, stop. Federal marshals departing Denver. Now stop, ETA, 12-hour. Hours stop, hold position, stop. Do not engage, stop. Wallace stop, 12 hours. They had to hold for 12 hours. Caleb looked out the window. Chamberlain's camp had grown. 60 men now, maybe 70, all armed, all waiting. The town had mobilized. Big Martha had organized defensive positions. The blacksmith had passed out weapons. The doctor had set up a medical station in the church basement. Ordinary people preparing to fight a war they never asked for. Sister Margaret stood beside Caleb. They're going to attack. Probably. Can we hold? Caleb thought about the cabin, about Sister Catherine and Ruth and Grace, about whether they had made it through the tunnel, about whether they were even alive. We hold, he said, or we die trying. The sun rose over Silverdale, turned the street gold, cast long shadows. In his camp, Garrett Chamberlain gave the order. His men mounted their horses, drew their weapons, formed a line. The battle for Silverdale was about to begin. The first assault came at 7 in the morning. Chamberlain's men charged from 3 directions, east, west, south, 40 riders moving in coordinated waves designed to overwhelm and break resistance through sheer numbers and firepower. They hit the barricades Big Martha and the townspeople had thrown up during the night. Overturned wagons, stacked barrels, furniture dragged from homes and shops. Not military fortifications, just desperate improvisation. But they held. The defenders fired from windows, from rooftops, from behind cover, ragged volleys, uncoordinated. The shooting of shopkeepers and farmers who had maybe hunted deer but never men. Their aim was poor, their discipline non-existent. But there were enough of them. 2 of Chamberlain's riders went down in the first minute. Horses screaming, men cursing. The charge broke against the barricades like a wave against stone. Caleb fired from the telegraph office window. The sharps boomed. A rider 200 yards out grabbed his shoulder and wheeled his horse away. Not dead, but hurt enough to reconsider. Sister Margaret reloaded beside him, her hands steady despite never having done this before. She passed him cartridges, kept count of their ammunition, watched the street with eyes that had learned to calculate angles and distance in the past 6 hours. The attackers pulled back, regrouped. Chamberlain sat his horse at the edge of town watching, calculating. He had numbers, but the defenders had something he didn't expect. Commitment born of rage. These were people he had cheated, threatened, exploited. A man whose brother died in a mine collapse because Chamberlain skimped on safety. A woman whose husband was beaten for organizing workers. A shopkeeper who paid protection money for years while watching his profits disappear into Chamberlain's pockets. Every bullet they fired carried years of accumulated grievance. The second assault came at 9 o'clock. Chamberlain changed tactics, no frontal charge this time. His men dismounted, used cover, advanced building by building. Professional, disciplined, dangerous. They got within 50 yards of the telegraph office before the blacksmith Henry Morrison stood up from behind a water trough and fired a shotgun loaded with nails and scrap metal. The blast was devastating at close range. 3 men went down screaming. The advance stalled. Inside the telegraph office, Mrs. Henshaw worked at her station. The equipment clicked steadily. She was sending updates to Judge Wallace, reporting casualties, requesting immediate assistance. The response came back. Marshals en route, stop, ETA 6 hours, stop. Hold position, stop, 6 hours. An eternity. Adelaide sat in the corner praying. Her lips moved constantly, words in Latin that Caleb didn't understand but found oddly comforting. The sound of faith under fire. At 11 o'clock, Chamberlain tried fire. His men launched burning arrows into the wooden buildings. The saloon caught first. Flames crawled up the walls, found the dry timber of the roof. Within minutes, the whole structure was burning. People ran from nearby buildings, formed bucket brigades. The well in the center of town became a frantic hub of activity. Water passed hand to hand, thrown on flames that seemed to laugh at such futile resistance. The saloon collapsed with a roar that shook the street. Sparks rose into the air like furious fireflies, landed on other roofs, started new fires. Big Martha stood in the street directing the firefighting, her face black with soot, her voice hoarse from shouting. She saw a child trapped on a second floor as flames climbed the stairs, didn't hesitate, ran into the building, emerged 30 seconds later with the boy in her arms. Her dress was on fire. She rolled in the dirt to put it out, then stood and went back to organizing the bucket line. Caleb watched from the window, saw courage he had forgotten existed in ordinary people. At 1 o'clock, the shooting suddenly stopped. The silence was worse than the gunfire. It meant something was coming, something bigger. Caleb scanned the street, saw movement, a wagon being pushed forward, large, heavy, and inside it something that made his blood run cold. Barrels, marked with black X's, mining explosives. They were going to blow the telegraph office. "Everyone out," Caleb said. His voice was calm, flat, the tone he'd used in the army when death was certain, but panic would only make it worse. "Back door, now." Sister Margaret grabbed the documents. Mrs. Henshaw shut down her equipment. Adelaide rose from her prayers with the serenity of someone who had already made peace with whatever came next. They moved through the back door into the alley. The wagon was still 50 yards from the front of the building. Men pushing it forward while others provided covering fire. Caleb raised his rifle, aimed at the barrels. From this angle, this distance, it was an impossible shot. The Sharps was accurate, but not that accurate. Not with people running and smoke obscuring his view, and his hands shaking from exhaustion. He breathed out, let his body settle into the familiar geometry of bullet and target and hope. Squeezed the trigger. The Sharps roared. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the world exploded. The wagon disintegrated. The blast was enormous. A column of fire and smoke rose into the sky. The concussion wave blew out every window within 100 yards. Men flew backward like leaves in a storm. The ground shook. When the smoke cleared, there was a crater in the street 20 feet across. Chamberlain's men broke. Not a retreat, a rout. They ran for their horses, abandoned positions. Some didn't even look back, just ran. The townspeople cheered, a ragged sound, half triumph, half disbelief that they were still alive. But Caleb knew better. This wasn't over. Chamberlain still sat his horse at the edge of town, still had 30 men. And he had the look of a man who had just decided that if he couldn't win, he'd burn everything to ash out of spite. Then dust rose on the eastern road. Riders, 20 of them, moving fast. For a terrible moment, Caleb thought it was reinforcements for Chamberlain. Then he saw the badges, federal marshals, led by a man with a gray beard and a face carved from granite. Judge Henry Wallace had arrived. The judge rode into Silverdale like vengeance given form. He was 64 years old, had spent 30 years on the frontier bench, had seen every kind of evil men could devise, and still believed in the possibility of justice. He reined his horse between Chamberlain's men and the town, raised one hand, his voice carried despite the chaos. Cease fire, federal authority. Anyone who fires another shot will be charged with assault on federal officers. Chamberlain urged his horse forward. Judge Wallace, this is a private dispute. You have no jurisdiction here. Wallace's face could have been stone. When it involves federal land fraud and conspiracy to commit murder, I have all the jurisdiction I need. He pulled a document from his coat. I have arrest warrants signed by the territorial marshal, based on evidence transmitted by telegraph this morning. He looked directly at Chamberlain. Garrett Chamberlain, you are under arrest for bribery of federal officials, fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and violations of the Federal Land Grant Act of 1846. Chamberlain's face went white, then red. You can't do this. I have rights. I have lawyers. You do, and you'll have a fair trial. Wallace gestured to his marshals. Take him. 3 marshals moved forward. Chamberlain's remaining men looked at each other, looked at the federal badges, at the Winchesters the marshals carried, did the math. One by one they dropped their weapons. But 5 men didn't. 5 loyalists who had been with Chamberlain from the beginning. Who knew that if he went down, they'd hang beside him? They drew their guns. The firefight lasted 10 seconds. The marshals had better training, better position, better discipline. When it ended, 3 of the loyalists were dead. 2 were wounded. The marshals had 1 man grazed across the arm. Chamberlain sat frozen on his horse, watching his empire collapse in real time. A marshal pulled him down, cuffed his hands, read the charges in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. The town erupted in cheers. Mrs. Henshaw stepped forward. Judge Wallace, there's someone you should meet. She gestured to Caleb, Martha Stone's son. Wallace turned. His eyes widened slightly. Caleb Stone, I investigated your mother's death 16 years ago. Couldn't prove it was murder. Didn't have enough evidence. Caleb met his gaze. You have it now. Wallace nodded slowly. That I do. A marshal approached. Sir, we have a situation at the Stone cabin. 3 women, nuns. They say they're witnesses. Sister Margaret gasped. They made it out. They're alive? Caleb asked. Very much so. One of them, Sister Catherine, is holding off what's left of Chamberlain's men single-handed. She's got a Winchester and appears to know how to use it. Despite everything, Caleb smiled. Another marshal rode up, leading a horse. On it sat a small girl, maybe 10 years old. Blonde hair, blue eyes wide with fear and hope. A man broke from the crowd, not running at the marshals, running toward the girl. Samuel Hart, he was 41, looked 50, face lined with guilt and sleepless nights. But the moment he saw Emma, the years fell away. He reached up, lifted his daughter from the saddle, held her like she was made of glass. His shoulders shook with sobs. Emma, he whispered. Emma, I'm so sorry. The girl clung to him. Papa, you came back. Wallace watched this. His expression softened slightly, then hardened again as he looked at Samuel. Samuel Hart, you have a choice to make. You can run, or you can stand trial and tell the truth about what Chamberlain forced you to do. Samuel looked up. His face was a ruin of tears and hope. I'll testify. I'll tell everything. Just let me keep my daughter. That'll be up to the court. Wallace's voice wasn't unkind, but cooperation will be noted. He turned to Caleb and Sister Margaret. You two and Mother Adelaide, I'll need full statements. Everything you know, everything you can prove. His eyes were sharp. We're going to destroy Chamberlain. But I need you to help me do it right. 6 weeks later, Denver Federal Courthouse, November 1885. The courtroom was packed. 200 people crammed into a space designed for half that, press from 5 states. Spectators who had traveled for days just to watch. This wasn't just a trial, it was theater. It was history. It was the moment when ordinary people saw that even the most powerful men could be brought to account. Caleb sat in the front row, uncomfortable in a suit borrowed from the blacksmith, his beard trimmed, hair cut, looking more like the soldier he'd once been than the hermit he'd become. Beside him, Sister Margaret sat in fresh habit. Sister Catherine and Sister Ruth flanked her. Sister Grace sat on the other side of Caleb, her hand occasionally finding his arm when the testimony got too difficult to hear alone. The prosecution was led by attorney Jonathan Pierce, 42 years old, Boston educated, had come west believing in justice and stayed despite the cost. This was his moment, the case he'd been building toward for a decade. Chamberlain sat at the defense table, still well-dressed, still composed, but the mask was cracking. His lawyers, expensive men from Denver and San Francisco, looked nervous. They knew what evidence the prosecution had. They tried to get it suppressed, failed. Judge Wallace presided. He had recused himself from ruling, but sat as witness to the proceedings. The actual judge was a stern woman from Washington, Judge Martha Blackwell, who had a reputation for intolerance of theatrics and absolute devotion to law. Pierce stood. The prosecution called Sister Margaret Brennan. Margaret rose, walked to the stand, placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth. Pierce's questioning was methodical, building the story brick by brick. Sister Margaret, please tell the court your birth name. Margaret Grayson. And your father's name? Father Thomas Grayson, Catholic priest, assigned to St. Mary's Mission in 1865. When did you last see your father alive? Margaret's voice stayed steady. September 20th, 1871. I was 17 years old. Please describe what happened. She did. Every detail. The three men on horses. Her father's horse suddenly spooked. The way he fell, the way she hid in the bushes. The conversation she overheard. Did you hear any names spoken? Yes, Garrett Chamberlain. The courtroom murmured. Judge Blackwell's gavel came down. Order. The defense attorney, a silver-haired man named Eldridge, stood for cross-examination. His strategy was clear. Discredit the witness. Miss Grayson, you were 17, traumatized, hiding. How can you be certain of what you heard? Margaret looked at him. Her gray eyes never wavered. I can be certain because I've spent 14 years remembering every second, because I entered the convent the next month and spent every day since praying for the strength to bear witness when the time came. Because some memories don't fade, they burn. Her voice carried across the courtroom, quiet, powerful, unshakable. Every night for 14 years, I've closed my eyes and seen those three men, heard their voices, heard them say, Chamberlain will pay well for this. I was 17. I was terrified, but I wasn't deaf. And I wasn't imagining things. Eldridge tried again. Isn't it possible you misheard, that the name you heard wasn't Chamberlain but something similar? No, how can you be so sure? Because one of the men repeated it. Chamberlain wants this done clean. No witnesses. Those were his exact words. Margaret's hands gripped the rail of the witness box. I've carried those words for 14 years, waiting for this moment. So no, I did not mishear. I did not imagine it, and I will never forget it. The jury was riveted. Even Eldridge looked shaken. He had nothing more. Margaret stepped down. The prosecution called Sister Ruth Anderson. Ruth presented the documents, explained chain of custody, described how Father Grayson had hidden them with Mother Adelaide, how they'd been preserved for 16 years. She was calm, precise, unshakable. When Eldridge tried to suggest the documents could be forged, she pulled out a magnifying glass and showed the jury the presidential seal. This is embossed into the paper, she explained. Not printed, not drawn, embossed, with a die that only exists in the presidential office. The technique hasn't been used since 1860. To forge this, you would need access to original government dies from 40 years ago. She explained the specific paper stock used by the territorial government, detailed the ink composition that couldn't be replicated. These documents are authentic, she said flatly. I've compared them against exemplars in the territorial archive. They match perfectly. Paper stock, ink, handwriting, government seals, everything. She looked directly at the jury. I'm a scholar. I've spent my adult life working with historical documents. These are real, and they prove that Garrett Chamberlain stole land that belonged to the Catholic Church through bribery and fraud. The jury looked convinced. The next day, Mother Adelaide testified. She was 76, blind in one eye, moved slowly to the stand. But when she spoke, her voice filled the courtroom. I watched Martha Stone die, she said. September 10th, 1869. Three men came to her home. They wanted the documents Father Grayson had left. She refused. They shot her. 3 times. I heard the shots from the bell tower. I climbed down. I held her while she bled out. Did she say anything before she died? Pierce asked gently. Yes. Adelaide's good eye found Caleb in the crowd. She said, tell my son I'm proud he served his country. Tell him to come home. Her voice didn't waver. It took him 16 years, but he came home. The courtroom was silent. Several jurors were crying. Pierce let the moment breathe. Then, Mother Adelaide, why didn't you come forward with this information before now? Who would believe a blind old woman living in ruins? Adelaide's voice was matter of fact. I had no proof, no witnesses, just my word against a rich man's lawyers. So I waited 16 years, waited for the right moment, the right people, the right time. She looked at Chamberlain. Truth doesn't expire, Mr. Chamberlain. It just waits for its day in court. The defense couldn't touch her. Every attempt at cross-examination made Eldridge look like he was bullying a blind elderly nun. He gave up after 5 questions. On the third day, Samuel Hart testified. He walked to the stand like a man going to the gallows. Emma sat in the front row watching her mother with eyes that held equal parts love and fear. Pierce was gentle but thorough. Mr. Hart, please describe your relationship with Garrett Chamberlain. Samuel's voice was rough. I was his enforcer. For 5 years, he paid me to intimidate people, to threaten them, to hurt them if threats didn't work. Did you ever kill for him? No, but I came close. Samuel looked at his hands. I'm not proud of what I did. Why did you do it? My wife died in childbirth, left me with Emma. I was broke, desperate. Chamberlain offered good money. I told myself I was doing it for my daughter. Truth is, I was doing it because I was too much of a coward to find honest work. Pierce pulled out a document. Mr. Hart, please identify this letter. Samuel read it. His face went gray. This is from Chamberlain to me, dated 6 months ago. It says that Emma is being held at his ranch as insurance. That if I don't complete the job of retrieving the church documents, she'll have an accident. He was blackmailing you through your daughter. Yes. The courtroom exploded. Judge Blackwell's gavel worked overtime. Pierce waited for silence. Then, Mr. Hart, what changed? Why are you testifying now? Samuel looked at Emma. Because my daughter deserves a father who tells the truth. Even when it's hard. Even when it costs everything. His voice broke. I did terrible things, but I won't compound them by lying. Garrett Chamberlain is a murderer. He killed Father Grayson. He killed Martha Stone. He threatened to kill my little girl, and he would have killed those 4 nuns if Caleb Stone hadn't stopped him. Eldridge tried to salvage it. Mr. Hart, you're a confessed criminal. You've admitted to assault, to intimidation. Why should this jury believe anything you say? Samuel looked at him. Because I'm done lying. Because my daughter is watching. Because I want her to grow up knowing her father told the truth when it mattered, even if it cost him everything. He looked at the jury. I'm guilty, I know that, and I'll accept whatever punishment comes. But Chamberlain is guiltier, and if my testimony helps put him away, then maybe, just maybe, I can give my daughter a reason to be proud of me again. On the 4th day Caleb testified, he told them about his mother, about finding her body, about the investigation that went nowhere because Chamberlain owned the sheriff, about 18 years in the mountains while justice rotted. Pierce showed him the documents. Is this your mother's signature? Yes. How can you be certain? Because I still have letters she wrote me when I was in the army. The handwriting matches. The phrasing matches. This is her testimony. Written 2 days before she was murdered. Caleb's voice was quiet, but it carried. She knew they were coming for her. She wrote this testimony anyway. Because truth mattered more than safety. She died protecting these documents. I won't dishonor that by staying silent. Eldridge's cross-examination was brutal. Mr. Stone, you lived as a hermit for 18 years. You spoke to no one. Some might say you went mad. How can we trust the testimony of a man who abandoned society? Caleb's voice was quiet, but it carried. I didn't abandon society. I hid from it. There's a difference. One is a choice, the other is cowardice. I was a coward. But 4 women taught me that truth matters more than fear. So I'm here, telling the truth, whether you believe it or not. He looked at the jury. My mother died protecting truth. For 18 years, I dishonored her memory by hiding. I won't make that mistake again. The prosecution rested. The defense called Chamberlain. He took the stand in an expensive suit, composed, confident, the mask of civilization firmly in place. He denied everything. The bribery, the murders, the land fraud, all of it. Pierce's cross-examination was surgical. Mr. Chamberlain, do you recognize this signature? He held up the governor's letter. It appears to be Governor Hutchins' signature. And this notation about receiving $5,000. I can't speak to the governor's private correspondence. Pierce smiled. It wasn't friendly. Mr. Chamberlain, we've subpoenaed your bank records. They show a withdrawal of $5,000 on May 2nd, 1870. One day before this letter was written. Where did that money go? Chamberlain's composure slipped, just for a second. I don't recall. You don't recall a withdrawal of $5,000? That's equivalent to $100,000 today. It was 15 years ago. The bank has records. So does the territorial treasury. They match. $5,000 withdrawn from your account. $5,000 deposited into an account held by Edmund Hutchins, same day. The courtroom was silent. Pierce continued. We've also obtained the surveyor's report you commissioned in 1870. The one that estimated silver deposits on the St. Mary's mission land at $2 million. That's why you wanted the land, not for ranching, for mining. He pulled out another document, and we have testimony from 3 of your former employees, men who participated in the intimidation campaign against anyone who questioned your land claims, men who are willing to testify in exchange for reduced sentences. Chamberlain's lawyer objected. The judge overruled. Pierce leaned in. Did you order the deaths of Father Thomas Grayson and Martha Stone? No. Did you bribe Governor Hutchins? No. Did you hold Emma Hart against her will, as leverage against her father? She was a guest. Pierce turned to the jury. Emma Hart is 10 years old. She will testify that she was locked in a room for 6 months, that she was told if her father failed to complete his assignments, she would be hurt, that she cried herself to sleep every night. He looked back at Chamberlain. Does that sound like a guess to you? Chamberlain had no answer. The defense rested. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood. On the count of bribery of a federal official, how do you find we're guilty? On the count of conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Father Thomas Grayson, guilty. On the count of conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Martha Stone, guilty. 12 more counts, 12 more guilty verdicts. Chamberlain sat frozen. His lawyer slumped. In the gallery, people wept. Caleb felt Sister Margaret's hand find his. He squeezed it, felt 18 years of weight begin to lift. 2 days later, Judge Blackwell delivered the sentence. Garrett Chamberlain, you have been convicted of crimes that strike at the foundation of law and justice in this territory. You corrupted government officials. You murdered innocent people. You terrorized communities. You believed your wealth placed you above consequence. She looked at him with eyes like flint. This court sentences you to 30 years in federal prison. Your assets are hereby seized and will be distributed as restitution to your victims. The land grant to St. Mary's Mission is restored in full with an additional $50,000 in damages. She brought down the gavel. Justice is served. 1 year later, fall 1886, the mission rose from the ground like a promise kept. New chapel, stone and timber, built by townspeople who donated labor because they wanted to, because they'd seen what happened when good people did nothing, because Sister Margaret had shown them that faith without works was just noise. The walls were thick, the roof solid, stained glass windows donated by Big Martha, whose saloon had been rebuilt bigger and better. A bell tower that could be heard for miles. 60 children attended the school. A dozen nuns had come from other missions to help. Sister Ruth ran a library with 2,000 books. Sister Grace operated a medical clinic that served anyone who needed it regardless of ability to pay. The land stretched for miles. Protected now. Legal. Theirs. Caleb lived in a small cabin on mission property. Not hiding anymore. Not isolated. But not crowded either. He taught tracking and survival skills to anyone who wanted to learn. Hunted for the mission kitchen. Fixed things that broke. Spoke to people. Not a lot, but some. It was enough. Samuel Hart visited monthly. He was Deputy U.S. Marshal now. Judge Wallace had offered him the job after the trial, a chance at redemption through service. Emma lived with him in Denver, attended school, smiled again. The two men would sit on Caleb's porch watching the sun set over the valley and not say much. But the silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was the silence of men who had walked through fire together and understood that some things didn't need words. One evening in October, Caleb stood at the cemetery beside the mission. 4 graves in a row. His wife Ellen, his son Thomas, his mother Martha, and now beside them a 4th stone, Father Thomas Grayson. His body had been exhumed from the dry well where it had been hidden, given proper burial. Sister Margaret had wept when they lowered the coffin, but they were good tears, the kind that washed away poison. Caleb stood before the graves with a handful of wildflowers. Ellen, Thomas, I know you're gone, but I'm living again. Found purpose in the last place I expected, helping build something good, something lasting. He placed flowers on each grave. Mama, you were right. Silence wasn't peace, but I found my voice through 4 women braver than any soldier I knew, through a town that chose right over easy, through remembering that running from pain doesn't make it smaller. It just makes you smaller. Footsteps behind him. Sister Margaret. She stood beside him, silent for a moment. Then, do you still miss them? Every day, but now I remember the love, not just the loss. They walked back to the mission together. A harvest festival was starting. Lanterns being lit, music tuning up, children running circles around adults who pretended to be annoyed but weren't. Sister Catherine was teaching a group of teenage girls to shoot, with actual rifles. The bishop had objected. She had ignored him. The girls were frontier daughters. They needed to know how to protect themselves. Sister Ruth stood on a ladder hanging a banner. Sister Grace emerged from the clinic, wiping her hands on her apron. She'd just delivered a baby, mother and child both healthy. Samuel arrived with Emma. The girl ran to Caleb, hugged him. Uncle Caleb, will you teach me tracking tomorrow? He smiled. Dawn, don't be late. As the sun set, Caleb sat on the chapel steps beside Sister Margaret. The valley spread before them. Golden light on mountains that had witnessed everything and judged nothing. You've barely rested all year, Margaret said, making up for lost time. You know you've done enough right to forgive yourself. Caleb thought about that, about 18 years of self-imposed punishment, about the moment he decided to open the door instead of hiding behind it. Getting there, he said. Margaret smiled. My father used to say grace isn't earned, it's received. I'm learning to receive it. They sat in comfortable silence. Then Sister Grace brought lemonade. The children want tomorrow's tracking lesson, and they said to stop calling you Mr. Stone. What should they call you? Caleb laughed. Actual laughter. Just Caleb. The festival continued into the night. Music and laughter and the sound of a community that had chosen to be one. 30 years passed like water over stone, smoothing rough edges, changing everything slowly. 1916, Colorado. Caleb Stone was 80 years old, white beard, leaning on a cane, but his eyes were still clear, his mind still sharp. He lived in the same small cabin, taught less now, mostly just watched the world he'd helped build continue growing without him. The mission was an institution now. 8 missions across Colorado and New Mexico, all connected. All thriving. Sister Margaret had become regional mother superior, traveled constantly, built a network of schools and hospitals and orphanages. She was 61, gray-haired, still fierce. Her book, Faith on the Frontier, was required reading in Catholic seminaries. Sister Catherine was 64, retired from daily teaching, but she still rode every morning, still taught the occasional horsemanship class. Her textbook on frontier education was used in schools across the West. Sister Grace was 49, Dr. Grace Murphy now, the first nun to earn a medical degree. She ran the mission hospital. 40 beds, 6 doctors. She trained other nuns in medicine. Her gentle spirit had been tempered by decades of frontier medicine, but never broken. Sister Ruth was 57, chief archivist for the Colorado State Historical Society. Her photography collection was museum quality. Her catalog system was used by libraries across the territory. She had never married history. She'd become it. Samuel Hart had died in 1912. Heart attack, age 68. Emma had been with him. His last words to her, "Tell Caleb he gave me back my soul." Caleb had spoken at the funeral, said that Samuel Hart had been a good man who made bad choices and then chose better. That redemption wasn't a destination, but a direction. That his friend had walked toward light even when darkness was easier. Emma Hart Morrison was 36 now, married to the blacksmith's son, 4 children. She taught at the mission school, visited Caleb monthly, called him Uncle Caleb. The mission in 1916 was everything they'd fought for. Thriving, protected, a testament to what happens when ordinary people refuse to accept injustice. Caleb sat in his cabin one evening, teaching his last class. 5 boys ages 12 to 15. Frontier skills, how to read tracks, how to survive when civilization failed. One boy asked, "Mr. Stone, why did you become a hermit?" Caleb was honest. "I was running from pain, thought isolation was safety." What changed? 4 women showed me that hiding isn't living, that community heals what solitude destroys. Another boy, "Are you happy now?" Caleb thought about that, about the question he'd spent decades answering through action instead of words. Happy, no. Content, yes. Purposeful, absolutely. That's enough. Later, he walked to the cemetery, stood before the graves. Ellen, Thomas, Martha, Father Grayson, Samuel. "I kept my promise," he said quietly. "Came back to life. Built something that matters. Your deaths weren't meaningless. They were the foundation of everything good that came after." Sister Margaret found him there. She often did. They had a rhythm now, 30 years of friendship built on shared trauma and shared purpose. "You're thinking about them," she said, "always, but now with gratitude, not guilt." They walked back together. The mission glowed with lamplight. Children's laughter carried on the wind. That night, there was a special mass, 30th anniversary of the trial verdict. Judge Wallace, now 84 and retired, was guest speaker. The chapel was packed, 300 people, 3 generations, children who had never known Chamberlain's tyranny. But they knew the story. It was part of the mission's foundation. Wallace spoke from the pulpit. His voice was thin now, but still carried authority. 30 years ago, evil seemed invincible. A man with money and power and no conscience. But ordinary people proved that truth endures. Caleb Stone could have stayed hidden. He chose to fight. The sisters could have fled. They chose to stand. Samuel Hart could have stayed corrupted. He chose redemption. He gestured to the assembled crowd. This mission isn't just buildings. It's proof that courage and faith and community can defeat any darkness. Remember that. Teach it to your children. Never forget the price that was paid. Afterward, children surrounded Caleb. They wanted stories, wanted to hear about the siege, the trial, the mountain. He told them, but always ended the same way. "Those stories aren't about me. They're about what happens when people choose right over easy, when they stand together instead of falling alone." Emma's oldest son, 12 years old, asked, "Will you write it down?" "So we remember." Caleb looked at Sister Ruth. She smiled. "I'll help." They began that night, Caleb dictating, Ruth writing, the story of 4 nuns and a hermit and the truth that set them free. The opening line, "I spent 18 years in silence." This is the story of how 4 women taught me to speak again. The fire crackled in the Colorado cabin. 1918, October. William Stone set down the leather journal, his grandfather's story, tears on his face. "Grandpa, I had no idea." Caleb, 82, now nodded. "Most people don't. We don't tell stories to brag. We tell them so wisdom doesn't die with us." William's hands shook. "What happened to everyone?" "Sister Margaret died 3 years ago. Peaceful, surrounded by her nuns. Sister Catherine is 86, still rides every morning. Sister Grace runs the hospital. Sister Ruth is finishing a comprehensive archive of the whole territory." He gestured to the photograph on the wall. 1885. Young Caleb beside four nuns. Samuel with Emma, all smiling. The mission has 500 families now. The land we fought for feeds them, educates their children, heals their sick. William looked at the document mounted beside the photograph. The original land grant, faded but preserved. This almost got you killed. It did, but truth is always worth defending, even when it costs everything. William stood. His train left in the morning. France waited. War waited. Grandpa, what if I die over there? Caleb met his grandson's eyes. You might. War doesn't care about fair. But if you do die fighting for something bigger than yourself, that's not tragedy. That's honor. He pulled something from his desk, a Bowie knife, the same one he'd carried in 1885. Your great-grandmother's blood is on this, metaphorically. She died for truth. Your job isn't to avenge her. It's to live the life she made possible. William took the knife, understanding the weight. I'm scared. Good. Fear means you understand what you're risking. Courage means you go anyway. They embraced. Tomorrow William would board a train, would sail for France, would face death in trenches across an ocean. But tonight he had his grandfather's story, and that was armor no bullet could penetrate. Morning came, cold and bright. Caleb walked William to the train station. Silverdale had grown, 2,000 people now, the mission visible on the hill, glowing in the sunrise. At the platform, Caleb handed William the journal. Take this, read it when you're afraid. Remember that you come from people who stood when it mattered. I'll come back, Grandpa. I know, and we'll build together. The train whistle blew. William boarded, leaned out the window as the train pulled away. Caleb watched until it disappeared, then walked back through Silverdale, past the memorial statue. 4 figures, bronze and permanent. Caleb, Samuel, Sister Margaret, Judge Wallace. The plaque read, They stood when it mattered. We stand because they did. He looked up at the mission. Sister Catherine waved from the porch. He waved back. His voice cracked with age but still strong, whispered to the morning. I came to these mountains to die. 4 women taught me to live. I hid from the world for 18 years. They showed me the world was worth fighting for. William will come home. He'll build. He'll remember. And when I'm gone, this land will remember too. He climbed the hill, slow now, each step deliberate. The mission doors opened. Children ran past laughing. Sister Grace at the clinic tending a patient. Sister Ruth in the library cataloging. The chapel bell rang. Morning mass. Caleb stood in the doorway, looking back over the valley. 33 years since 4 nuns ran to his cabin carrying truth in a leather satchel. 33 years since he chose to open the door instead of hiding behind it. The best decision he ever made. He turned, walked into the chapel, sat in the back pew, bowed his head, not in prayer, not exactly, just in gratitude that he had lived long enough to see that courage multiplied. That truth endured, that ordinary people could change the world if they just chose to trauma. The mass began. Light streamed through the stained glass windows, painted the congregation in colors that shouldn't exist but did. And Caleb Stone, who had spent 18 years in silence, let himself be part of the sound of community, of faith, of hope. He had finally come home.